OCA media is out of this world.
Losing the fear of looking foolish comes with age.
Who did you steal him from?
Losing your way in your own home doesn't. Confusion with time and place may be a sign of Alzheimer's.
Mom, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine.
Early detection gives you and your loved one time to plan for the future. Learn the warning signs of Alzheimer's.
When is that going out?
It won't, we're not mailing it, we're carrying it.
Okay.
We can't stand it. Yeah, we can't afford to do all.
Yeah.
Postage is a lot, and then you never know what it's gonna hit, you don't know how many doors actually hit. So, yeah, we're mailing to the town, the school board, the town will be affected by that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, everything on it is because we're like the Supreme Court and the state superintendent, that's not our lid, we're carrying other lids. And I don't think anybody wants to write any constitutional amendment because it's done. It's ridiculous because pretty overwhelming support, so people don't understand. And it takes too long to actually go to fix it.
Well,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, let's go. You should be on. It's on film.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm Phil Van Kampen, Village Board President. We also have several other board members here today and department heads to listen in. The format will be that Martin Shanks, our village administrator, will do a presentation of about 30-40 minutes, and then the rest of time we'll dedicate to questions and answers. We ask that you hold your questions until Martin's finished his presentation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Martin. Thank you.
Right, so, well, hello everyone. As Phil mentioned, my name is Martin Shanks. I'm the village administrator for the Village of Oregon. I've been here with the village for almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years in May. My role here with the village is to serve the village board, support the village board, and then to also carry out whatever decisions they make and oversee the day-to-day operation. So as Phil said, we're going to do a little bit of a two-parter here tonight for the referendum information session. We should be going until about 8 p.m. Presentation, I'll be giving that here for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It's kind of broken down into 3 different parts here, starting with just why are we doing this? What are the challenges that are causing this? And then we're going to talk about these challenges and their impact on village services. And then just what is this referendum? What is the dollar amount? What's in it? What's going on with it? And then, as Phil mentioned, we'll do the Q&A for the rest of the time. And really the goal here is you just walk away from today with answers to any questions you have and you feel informed when you head into the voting booth on April 1st. So I'll start the presentation with I think something that everybody can relate to, of course, and that is inflation. So one of the challenges that has sort of led us here to a referendum is what we've seen over the last couple of years with inflation. And of course, we've all experienced it in our lives. And the village is not immune to that. We're not insulated from inflation. So pressures on employee wages that we've seen in the overall economy, prices for supplies, services we purchase, utility costs, keeping the lights on, paying the electric bill. Those things are going up in our personal lives. They're going up for the village as well. And it's having a huge impact on our ability to pay for costs for services. And importantly, the thing that is bolded there at the bottom, costs are rising to provide services even at a stagnant level. So it doesn't matter if you're a growing community, Village of Oregon is growing, of course, or not a growing community. If you're small, big, urban, rural, costs are just going up, right? And it doesn't matter if you're standing still or if you're moving forward. The cost to provide services, government services, local government services, is just simply more than it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, even if we were standing still. So the next challenge requires a little bit of legwork here to talk through, and that relates to our primary funding source for local government services. So you may or may not know that property taxes are really our primary funding source, and that's not by accident. There's state laws in place that really funnel local governments into using property taxes. We don't have sales tax for local governments. We don't have income tax. A lot of fees and charges are restricted, or they have conditions that are put on them, so we have some limitations there. And so really the primary funding source that we have to use for local government services is the property tax. Now, you may or may not know, and a lot of people know, but a lot of people don't know, but when you get your property tax bill in December, you're not just paying your taxes for the village, it's going to other districts and other taxing jurisdictions. So you get your bill, you see your amount at the bottom of the bill, you write your check, it goes to the village, or your bank writes it if you have your mortgage sometimes. But of that amount, 53% goes to the school district. 29% stays with the Village of Oregon, 14% goes to Dane County, 4% goes to the tech college. So 29 cents of every dollar that you paid in property taxes this last year stayed with the village, the rest went somewhere else. And then within that amount that the village gets to keep, there are really 2 different ways that the village uses those funds. Operating expenses, and then making payments on village debt. This is an important distinction because these 2 different uses are regulated in much, much different ways under state law. So with debt payments, so 36% of the property taxes that the village gets go to pay down village debt this last year. Now, under state law, local governments have a statutory cap. We can only borrow so much money, but that cap actually happens to be quite high. So there's a lot of flexibility for local governments to take out debt to pay for streets, facilities, things like that, and then to raise property taxes to make those debt payments year after year. So when we go to do our budget, we have our debt schedule, we have payments that we know we're gonna have to make in the following year. And let's say it's $1 million. We can raise $1 million in property taxes to make those debt payments. Now, the following year, if our payments are, let's say, $500,000, we can take $500,000, but we don't get to keep that other $500,000 that we took last year because we don't need it. We can only raise the amount of property taxes for debt payments to cover the need. So there's no carryover year to year. They look at it, we have to fill out a form for the state, shows that we just need this amount and we can take this amount. We don't get to keep it and use it for something else if it goes down the next year. The other side is for property taxes that we get is for these operating expenses. So this is for our services that we provide. This is what keeps the doors open, the lights on, pays employees' wages, pays for things like road salt and supplies, things that we do year after year, every year. So unlike the other side, for debt payments and capital expenses, the operating side is very, very heavily restricted. And from year to year, we get to keep what's known as a base levy. So if we raise $5 million for our operating expenses from property taxes, we can keep that $5 million every year, year after year, year after year. But we cannot increase it just however we want, however your elected officials want to increase it. The only way that you can increase property taxes for ongoing operating expenses is primarily through new construction in your community. So in order to grow your primary revenue source of property taxes to pay for your services, you have to grow as a community in order to get more revenue from that source. So this is what this referendum is all about right here, is there's a heavy restriction on our primary funding source to pay for ongoing operating expenses for our services. It's tied to a specific factor, and those expenses that for our operating are starting to get away from us. And part of that is inflation. So when we take these two things together, inflation and then these restrictions that are on property taxes specifically for our ongoing operating and our services, this chart does a really good job of sort of capturing what's been happening the last couple of years. So the orange here is the amount, the percent that we've been able to raise our property taxes for ongoing operating expenses. So this is the new construction value that's been created in the village, which allows us to increase our property taxes. And in 2017, it was 2%, 2.5%. 2018, it was about 3%. 2019, maybe 3 3/4. 2020, 2.5%. 2021, 2%. So we were able to raise our property taxes by those percentages in those years to pay for our ongoing operating expenses. Now when you overlay that with the inflation rate, for Oregon, for many years, this worked out okay because we were growing, inflation was relatively low or stable, growth sort of helped us grow our services along with that growth and stay on top of inflation. So in 2017, inflation was 1%. Our growth was 2.5%. So we were staying on top of it. And you can see we're staying on top of it in the successive years. Then 2022, 2023, and 2024 happened. And you can see where things started to get a little askew. So 2022, we grew about 3%, and we were able to increase our property tax levy by 3%. Inflation was 5%. 2023, it was about 2.5%. We could grow our property taxes. Inflation was a little bit over 8%. Last year, we could grow our property taxes by about 3%. Inflation was still about 3 or 4%, and still remains about elevated at about that much. And so typically, we've been in this 2%, 3% sort of range for growth. And what that equates to in dollars is about 160,000, 150,000, sometimes about 180,000. So that goes really quick. So you do a 1% increase in wages to employees, you've already taken about $50,000 to $60,000 of that. You want to hire one officer, it's about $100,000 in wages and benefit costs. So in two actions, relatively simple actions, adding a new officer, giving a 1% increase to employee wages, you've used the entire amount of primary new revenue that you have to maintain your services. So, again, at the bolded part here, costs are growing faster than revenue. The second part of this, from a revenue standpoint, is so property taxes are significantly important for local governments. For us, for the village, makes up about 60% of our operating expenses. The other part, there's another big source of revenue that local governments receive, and that is sort of this umbrella term known as shared revenue. And this is money that we receive from the state of Wisconsin. And it comes in different types of programs, but it's money that the state collects from things like sales tax and other ways that they tax us as residents, and then they take that money and then they give it to local governments in different ways and different programs. So that source of revenue, all those different types of programs combined, makes up about 20% of the coverage for our operating expenses. So between property taxes, shared revenue, we're talking upwards in the upper 80s, close to 90% of the revenue that we need to cover our operating expenses. So for shared revenue, back in 2023, we received over $400,000 for paying for our ongoing operating expenses. And since that time, that amount has either been decreasing or has been a little up and down. If we were to have the same amount of dollars that we would get from this program, again, the second source of funding for our operating expenses that we rely on, those dollars today would be over $700,000. Now in 2023, we received $200,000, a little over $200,000. Now in 2024, they did change the shared revenue law. They made an adjustment, and in 2024, we did actually get an extra $292,000 on top of the $233,000. So in 2024, 2025, we've actually gotten a little over $500,000 for shared revenue. So we got caught up some ground within the last couple of years, at least historically speaking, from going back 2 decades. But even again, those dollars in 2003 would mean, if we were getting those same amount of dollars, they would mean about $700,000 today if you were accounting for inflation. So you have property taxes, your primary revenue source, very restrictive. Those restrictions have been in place for 20 years now. They started in 2006. And then on top of that, your second primary source of revenue for local government services, shared revenue, has been decreasing or been flat, with a little bit of a jump here in the last couple of years, but not close to where those dollars were back 20 years ago. So growth, so obviously the village is growing. And obviously, as you can understand, based on how the village's primary revenue source, the property tax, works, you can see why growth is very important for local governments in order to even generate more revenue for services. So the system is designed to push local governments to grow. They want you to grow because then you get more money in order to be able to provide your services. So there are advantages to growing in this system. There are challenges, of course. It, of course, creates more demand. And if these sources are not catching up or keeping up, it can certainly add to the demand on the services. And of course, we've doubled in size. We were about 5,000 in population in 2000, and now we're about 12,000 in 2025. Since 2014, it's been a 26.8% increase, closing in on 30% now. So of course that obviously is a factor as well. Now I'll say, and I kind of mentioned before, how these dynamics are sort of affecting all local governments in Wisconsin. Everyone's obviously dealing with inflation. Everybody's been working within these revenue systems now for 2 decades. Between 2006 and 2018, 2006 being the year that these revenue restrictions went into place, there was about 100 local government referendums between 2006 and 2018 in a 12-year span. So average about a little less than 10 a year. Last 2 years, there's been 100 alone. And these are happening everywhere. They're happening in all parts of the states. They're happening in communities that are growing, communities that are not growing, small communities, big communities, urban communities, rural communities. All of the same factors are all catching up to local governments all at the same time. And a great example is just right here in Dane County. In November, there were 4 operational referendums on the ballot in Dane County. Village of Maple Bluff, which is a very small community, entirely surrounded by the city of Madison. About 1,300 people live there, primarily residential, not a growing community at all. They're totally built out, mostly single-family housing. They went for a referendum, 22% increase to their operating they asked for. City of Monona, a little bit bigger community, 8,000, 8,500, also surrounded by the city of Madison. They can't grow. Also a lot of older residential neighborhoods. They have some opportunity for some redevelopment on some of their big corridors they have, but they don't really grow, not at a good clip, not like the Village of Oregon. They asked for a 30% increase to their operating expenses. And then you had City of Madison, City of Fitchburg also went for a referendum in November. And those communities are growing wildly, certainly at a faster clip than the Village of Oregon. City of Madison asked for a 7% increase. City of Fitchburg asked for 14%. So it doesn't matter what kind of community you are. It doesn't matter if you're growing, again, not growing. These 2 factors of inflation and then the revenue system in Wisconsin have finally sort of caught up, and everybody is feeling it all sort of at the same time. So you might be wondering and might be thinking, okay, I can understand that, I guess. So what has the village done over these 20 years, if you've been in this environment? How has the village handled this? What are the village's services like? Have you done things creatively? Have you thought of different ideas? Have you tightened up? And again, all local governments have been in this dynamic, again, for 2 decades, and that has been the culture, right? We have been living in these sort of restrictive environments for 20 years. So to start, for the Village of Oregon, we don't do a whole lot of stuff, actually. We do, I think, what most people would consider pretty traditional local government services. So we do public safety, police, fire, EMS. We do public works, streets, park maintenance, brush and forestry, facilities, stormwater management. We have a library, we have a senior center. That's pretty much it. That's what we do. We have the folks here at Village Hall, we have our clerks who run the elections, and then we have our finance people who pay the bills, do payroll, that sort of thing. This is pretty much all we do. And in a lot of communities this size of Oregon and even smaller, they'll have things like rec departments. We don't have a rec department. We don't have a separate parks department. We do that within Public Works. We have really good assets in the community like the Youth Center, OCA Media. These are separate entities. They're nonprofits. They provide public service-like things. Sometimes those things are often done within local governments, but they happen in separate entities in Oregon. So over these 20 years, like all local governments in Wisconsin, we've done quite a number of things. First of all, the first thing that went was, if there was any fluff in your budget, that was the easy thing to go, right? When these restrictions went into place in 2006, that was the easy thing to go. And that, I think, was the whole intention behind this law, right? They wanted local governments to kind of tighten their belts, sharpen their pencils, and that's what happened. We use the private market. We contract out services. Our attorney, our assessor, our information technology, building inspection, some of our planning and zoning administration, some of our financial management services, engineering, of course, garbage, recycling, pickup. We contract out to the private market. Engaged in a lot of intergovernmental relationships. Of course, fire and EMS, we partner with 3 other surrounding communities. The senior center is a village function, but we get contributions from 4 other communities that surround us for that. A number of services happen at the county level. So there's a lot of emergency management things that happen at the county level. Dispatch happens at the county level. Animal control through Dane County Humane Society. We have good partnerships with the school district. We share some costs on crossing guards. The school resource officer is a shared cost. Even our traffic signals are managed by the city of Madison. So we've done some of those things. We share a lot of things across positions. So human resources functions are shared across different departments, different positions. Some people, some employees in the clerk's department, myself, and finance department share some of those things. Public works, in a lot of communities, especially when you start to get to this size, you start to see kind of a division where utilities like water and sewer utilities start to do their own thing, and public works starts to do their own thing, and parks start to do their own thing. We just share. We just have staff that share and cross-train all across. And wherever there's a need, we have those people go and they do that need. We pulled on different revenue sources. So the wheel tax, of course, is probably the most visible one. So that's a source that local governments can use in Wisconsin. And that source has been there for, I think the law's been there since like the 70s. And even just 15, 20 years ago, there was maybe like 3 or 4 communities that had the wheel tax. Now there's over 60. They're facing the same things that we've been talking about. Some communities are doing things like converting services to fees, like stormwater utilities. I've heard of utilities for fire protection, so these services are now getting put on utility bills. So communities are trying to do different types of things to find different sources of revenue. And we've done other creative things too. Of course, we have a lot of development impact fees. So when new development comes, based on the number of dwelling units, they pay a library impact fee. There's 2 different types of park impact fees. There's an impact fee for the water utility. There's an impact fee for the sewer utility. Any development that happens on the west side over here has another fee, a west side development fee that is collected. These things go to all sorts of different infrastructure projects. So the library impact fee helps offset costs for our debt payment on the new library. Any parks improvements, the same. Street projects, that sort of thing. So that helps alleviate existing taxpayers from having to take on all the burden of new infrastructure. Done things like this past year we implemented a fee system for sports leagues to be able to use our ball fields and athletic fields. We have a metals dumpster down at the brush site. Actually generated like $9,000 in revenue last year. So small stuff like that. We have a really good qualified diesel mechanic in our public works garage. We've been able to share him with the fire district, so we can charge them time and materials, lowers their cost, gives us a little bit of revenue. We do things like we try to pay for almost all of our stuff through credit cards because we get points that we can convert to cash, and then we get revenue from that. We get like $36,000 in revenue from credit card points. Of course, we switched contractors. We bid out things to try to get better costs. We switched our internet provider a couple years ago, saved a few $1,000s across all of our services. We've made investments in IT. So we've converted all of our timekeeping process and payroll to paperless. It's all electronic. We do all of our invoices now electronically. We converted our village board agendas and packets to electronic a couple years ago. So not necessarily saving a lot of cost, but it saves a lot of time for staff, which frees them up to be able to do other things. Another thing that a lot of communities employ is holding back on employee wages. So that's an easy one from a dollars and cents perspective. Through 2010s, average increase for most employees was about 1.5% a year. There's a couple of years where it was 0%. Close employee benefits are another target, and there's been reductions there. Obviously, the most visible one was 2011 with Act 10. That changed employee benefits for local government employees as well, making contributions to retirement and health insurance. We also use a lot of volunteers. So poll workers can volunteer their time. Library uses volunteers for programs and different services. We have a lot of volunteers in different organizations that do things in our parks, little projects there, and help maintain trees and plantings and that sort of things. Senior Center has a lot of volunteers. They had 180 active volunteers in 2024. The amount of hours the volunteers put in there equated to about 4 full-time equivalent employees. And then we've been able to leverage donations, grants for certain types of things that are popular. So the K-9 program in the police department, entirely funded through donations. People like giving to that program. Other stuff in the policing, community policing efforts, Shop with a Cop, the Med Drop Box. You can get grants, you can get donations for those things. Public art, all the public art you've seen in this community, funded entirely through donations and grants, never through property taxes. It's been a great group of people who have taken a serious initiative on that. They spent some time raising a lot of money and getting some really good grants, and their work has really paid off. So that's how things have been going the last 20 years. That's sort of the culture of local government, is trying to be creative and try to tighten things up because we just simply have no other choice. So usually when I get to this part of talking about some of these things, people will often ask, well, how are the village's finances? Have you been making good financial decisions? This sounds like things are very tight. Are things not very good from that perspective? And I'll say, coming to this community 4 years ago, there was 2 things that really stood out to me. And one of the things here is captured on the screen, and that is the village's tax rate compared to other cities and villages in Dane County has been historically very low. Certainly below average, typically sitting in the bottom third. I think it's just right on the cusp there of the bottom third of all cities and villages. So this is the rate at which we tax property, right? And so we're historically lower and typically again in that bottom third. This graph looks very similar for utility rates as well. So village water and sewer utility rates, so we operate those 2 utilities as well, which are paid through your utility tax bills. Same deal. In fact, last year, water rates for Oregon were second to the lowest of all of these communities, in county, cities, and villages. And the water rates are in the bottom 40%. So you can go to communities to the south, east, north, all over in Dane County, all of our neighbors, and in some cases you may be paying thousands of dollars more a year for for local government services and utilities. The second thing that jumped out to me too is the village's bond rating. So when we go out for debt, when we go out to get debt for projects, we have these bond rating agencies. They're third parties that evaluate our creditworthiness, our ability to be reliable. You know, investors buy our debt, right? So they want to make sure that we pay our bills and have money to be able to pay our bills. And so they do a pretty deep dive on us when we go through this process. We do it periodically, every year, sometimes every other year, depending on the debt that we're taking out. And they spend time with us. They dig into our finances. They dig into village board agendas and minutes just to see how the village board behaves and acts. And then they issue a credit rating, a bond rating. The village is a AA2, which is the highest rating that a local government of our size can actually get. And I lifted a couple quotes from the last credit report that we got. And these are out online. They're on our village website. You can find them on the rating agency websites as well. So Oregon's credit profile will likely remain stable, supported by ongoing development and a strong financial position. Allowable growth in the village's levy remains modest relative to the needs of the community growing as quickly as Oregon. To address growing expenditures, management has been proactive in financial planning. Solid transparency and budget management balanced against a relatively restrictive institutional structure. And the structure that they're talking about, of course, is our primary source of revenue, which is taxes. So interestingly enough, on our credit report, as all local governments do in Wisconsin, we get dinged on the fact that our primary source of revenue is very restrictive. So, important thing, I guess, bringing all these things together, and I want to talk about the second part here where we talk about the effect of some of these challenges on our services. I think the important thing to know is the village's budget is balanced. We're meeting industry best practices. We have policies for rainy day funds. We're meeting those. We're in good financial position. But we do a lot of long-range forecasting and a really good financial management, and we sort of see what's on the horizon here. We see the challenges that are impacting us. We see where our services are today and how they're being affected, and we see what's coming down the line, and that's what this referendum is about. So specifically, how these challenges then trickle down, and then all these funding challenges trickle down to services that you actually see and get from the village. Public Works, again, street maintenance, snow plowing, facility maintenance, brush control, maintain the village's parkland. They do the engineering for the village, work with our engineering consultants. They manage their stormwater at storm sewers. They manage the Prairie Mound Cemetery as well. So in the last 10 years, our village street system has expanded 20%. We've added 20% more in miles to our streets. We have 28 parks, 347 acres. That's increased 12% in that time. So again, we're growing, right? There's more stuff to take care of. The level of staffing that we had 10 years ago may have been sufficient to doing what we're doing, providing the quality of service that people may expect or may desire. But when you have assets and infrastructure that this department maintains that are expanding 20%, 12%, there's only so much time, so much money in a day that the level of staffing that you have is going to continue to be able to address those needs. Same thing with police. I mentioned before, we doubled in size in the last 20 years. Police calls have gone up 76.6% over that time. We look at this comparison, is it helpful or not? I think it's good for providing context. This is officers to population ratios per 1,000. These are looking at some of our peer communities in Dane County: Cottage Grove, McFarland, Forest, Stone, Verona, Montague. Probably those top four are ones that we more commonly kind of look at as more equal comparisons. But we can see, we're a little bit lower. Our officers to population is a little bit lower, and maybe that's a problem, maybe that's not a problem, but it certainly is a data point that is interesting to us and we want to learn more about when we see things like that. But more importantly, what we're seeing for police services is we're seeing an increase in the types of calls that are more demanding. So these are things like domestic disputes, domestic violence, assaults, violations of court orders, mental health calls. We've seen these things start to increase over the last few years. And these types of calls, you need 2 officers. So not just for the safety of the people that are part of this situation, but for the safety of the officer too, of course. So 10 years ago, 2 officers was probably sufficient most of the time. they could cover the types of calls, the volume of calls that were coming in a typical day, typical shift kind of thing. But now when we see these calls start to go up where we have to pull 2 officers to them, it leaves the community without any available police officers. And if this is increasingly happening, it's increasingly likely that if you call and you need an officer, you may get a response of, hey, you need to wait 15 minutes, 20 minutes while we try to pull an officer from another agency or somebody from Dane County. So this is the kind of stuff that kind of creeps up on people, where all of a sudden you had an expectation of how a service was going to be or how it was going to react when you needed it, and then you make the call when you need it, you think they're going to be there in 5 minutes or less, which is what the response time has typically been in the past, but it's creeping up now because they're getting pulled away to these different calls, and we can't get to other calls quickly enough, or other agencies can't get to them quickly enough because they're dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with. So again, it's something that creeps up on you, and the way that you expected it to be delivered in the past is just starting to stretch and starting to kind of get away from us. The library, of course, we built a new library, and we've seen just a crazy amount of increase in usage and growing demand for the library. It's an incredibly popular service. You can see the graph there. I'll just rattle off some of these numbers. So 2023, 77,000 visits to the library. 2024, 128,000, 65% increase. Materials checked out, 187,000 in 2023. 2024, 240,000, 27% increase. Reference questions asked, just a bit under 6,000 in 2023, 11,000 in 2024, an 89% increase. Attendance at library programs, 10,000 in 2023, 16,000 in 2024, 62% increase. Library cards issued, 2023, 837, 2024, 1,691, 102% increase. First half of 2024, the library was short-staffed on 75% of the days it was open. The library relies on a lot of part-time help. So there's only so much hours that are budgeted or that we can give to people. And so if people are sick or there is somebody who is left, there's a vacancy, or somebody is taking some time off because they have that benefit program that they're able to use, it leaves us short-staffed. And so when we're short-staffed and we have demand that is increasing at the rate and at the popularity of which the library is, it obviously creates challenges for those staff to continue to deliver what may have been an expectation or what may have been a type of service that you thought you were getting maybe 10 years ago. Now suddenly it's much more significantly stretched and stretches their ability to do the types of things that maybe were desired or expected in the past. And then the senior center, and here's something, here's sort of a unique thing too here with, we talked about inflation and revenue and growth, but sometimes the growth also, the type of growth also affects the type of service. So here with the senior center, our population is growing up, but also the older population is growing up much quicker. And so the percentage of older adults in the village is increasing and is projected to increase even further compared to other parts of the population. So at the senior center, we have case managers, which help older adults with different things. In 2009, we had 2 full-time case managers serve 58 adults with those services. Now, over that time, the village reduced the hours of the case managers by 20%. They're 2 part-time positions now. They're no longer full-time. Of course, that was something to help pull back on costs. In 2023, those 2 part-time case managers handled 220 adults compared to the 58 adults in 2009. So that's a 279% increase. So again, it's not just inflation and revenue and just growth in general, but these other little nuances where you have these demographic shifts, and that can really cause a spike on a certain kind of service that the village has. And then village staff in general. So across the whole of all of our departments and services, 2022 Village brought on a consultant to take a look at employee pay. And we've done some work on that. We've tried to get some of those positions up to where they should be at their market rate. That study at that time in 2022 had shown that on average, village positions were between 6 and 14% below comparable positions in comparable communities. So a police officer doing the same kinds of work, really, and all of our positions do kind of the same sorts of work in all these different communities, may be paid 6 to 14% more just down the road in Stoughton or another community in Dane County. And so we have a lot of wonderful communities in Dane County, great quality of life. And if you're a good public servant, whether it's an officer or a public works crew or a clerk or whoever, you're gonna look at pay and benefits, right? And you're gonna go into the communities that pay and have those good benefits. And so when we have 50% of our staff sitting below the market rate, that creates challenges for recruitment and retention, right? And ultimately, services are not delivered in a vacuum, right? They're delivered by people. And so you can really, really stretch your dollar more if you have really good employees and you'll be able to recruit really good employees and keep really good employees. So we certainly don't have an expectation to be above the market or set the market, but in the ballpark, I think is what most people, I think, would find reasonable for pay for staff. We know we can sell Oregon as a great community, and we have a great culture in the village. So all these things taken together, what is the time I'm at? 7:13. Okay, or 6:13. Or what time is it? 7:50. Okay. All right. So I better wrap this up here. So what's the solution to all of these challenges? So Village Board, of course, has looked at this, and we've talked about these challenges for years and years. And so last year we did quite a bit of work on trying to bring all of these different types of things together and trying to analyze them and trying to forecast needs for the next few years, out to 10 years. And ultimately the decision was, we're at a point where we need to put this to the residents because if we don't have additional funding, these challenges are now going to start stretching us too far, and we're going to have to start making decisions about what things we do or we don't want to do anymore in terms of our services. And so the request here is to go to residents, and residents can decide. They can assess this information and make what's in the best interest for themselves and for what they think is in the best interest of the community. So the question on the ballot is here. You can take a minute to read it. I will just say you will probably get to the end of it and you will probably wonder why on earth did you write the question this way? We have to. Village law dictates how we write this question. So we don't have any discretion on how to write this. The only discretion that we have is just inputting our numbers. And then we get to add a little line right after the for the purpose of, which we put in. We want to maintain our current services, police, public works, parks, library, and senior center services. But that's how we have to word it. I had a resident reach out asking about the language for this, and he's like, I think I support it, I think I understand it. He's like, but why on earth did you write the question this way? Nobody is going to understand what you're asking for.
Jimmy Carter said back in the 70s that they should simplify all legal documents to a 6th grade reading level.
Yes, I would agree.
They haven't done it yet.
Yeah, we're still waiting. So yeah, we don't have a choice. We have to word it that way. And hopefully these sessions will help folks understand, and the information we're putting out will help folks understand what it's about. So one of the questions that we have about this question is, what does the ongoing basis mean? This means if it was approved, it's a one-time permanent increase to the levy. So it's not going to compound year after year. If this passes, $1.95 million will be added into the village's levy for these services, and you'll see that effect on your tax bill in December of this year. And that would be the same. It'll just stay in the levy year after year, this 1.95. It won't go up. The school district had a referendum a few years ago. They sort of did like a stair step, like a 3-year stair step where they had some, and they added some on top the next year and added some top on the third year. This isn't like that. This is a one-time increase. It doesn't compound, or there's nothing that comes on after. What's in the referendum? 2 ways to look at it. So on the left side, by use, most of it is new positions or additional hours for existing positions. So this is getting the level of staffing to meet this sort of demand that we're seeing, and to meet the demand that we foresee right now, but also into the foreseeable future. So we're talking 5, 6, 7 years out that we expect this funding to definitely address. And when we did the survey last fall, that was the feedback that we got from folks, from residents, was we can see some support for trying to maintain core traditional services, at least in the short term. Once we get out 5, 6, 7 years beyond that, let's reassess where we're at then, and then let's talk about, you know, where the environment is and if there's additional funding at that time. Wage adjustments, as I said, is a big one for existing staff. About a quarter of it is for that, and then 15% is for operational maintenance. So this is stuff like making sure that we can keep paying our utility bills, are buying those types of services and supplies that we need to buy, making sure we're able to maintain facilities, parks, that sort of thing. The other side, you can see it broken down by function. So police, about a third of the referendum is for the police department, and that's primarily through additional staffing. Public Works, about 18%. Like I said, the Parks is part of Public Works, but I wanted to break it out so you can kind of see how much is actually going to the Parks function. So that's 8% there on the bottom. General government is your clerks, your finance, you know, the stuff that happens up here at Village Hall. We have an HR position in this referendum, so that's in there. And then, of course, the senior center. So in total, it's about a little over 9 full-time equivalent positions that are being requested here. And those are three officers in the police department, 3 crew in the public works, 2 full-time equivalents at the library, 1 HR position here at Village Hall, and then getting those case managers at the senior center back up to full-time. So what's the impact on referendum? So if it's approved, as far as property tax goes, pretty easy sort of way to think of it. $100,000 of value is almost $100, $99.74. Median value home last year was $430,000. In the Village of Oregon, it would be about $428 in impact, broken down by month, about $35. So what happens if it's not passed, if it's rejected? There's no plan right now. The Village Board hasn't discussed, you know, what things may or may not happen. It's something we'll assess if it occurs. But you can imagine this would probably be broken down into a few different sort of chunks of things, like reducing service hours at village facilities. So we're talking library, senior center here at Village Hall. Increasing or additional fees for village services. So if there's things that we can pull on there, of course, a lot of those fees create overhead, which creates more cost in some ways. So we want to try to avoid that, but there are options out there. Challenge public safety services. I talked about response time, reduce public works services, deferred maintenance. So these are things like snow plowing, brush pickup, the brush pile, maintaining our parks, that sort of thing. Impacts the Oregon Public Library, Senior Center, different programs, things that they offer may need to be evaluated. The clerks here at Village Hall, absentee voting is insanely popular in the Village of Oregon. They're almost running an election for 2 weeks before the election now, and there's cost to that. We have poll workers that need to be here. Our clerks get pulled into it, of course, so we need to think about those types of things as well. So really, again, it comes down to pulling this all together. This referendum is really about just trying to maintain the basic services that we provide as a village. We're not asking to do anything new or additional. We're trying to just do those basics. Police, public works, parks, library, the senior center. It really comes down to staffing, because we see that stretch happening with our staff. There's only so many hours, there's only so many dollars that are in the budget, and we feel like this will catch us up and make sure that we can maintain that moving forward. So April 1st is the election. You're required to show an acceptable photo ID in order to vote. You can find more information at myvote.wi.gov. You can call the clerk's department. They are happy to help answer any questions on elections and voting. I went a little bit over my time, but I will go longer for questions as well. So happy to take any questions as they come.
I think that they should have seniors and disabled people at limited income paying less for taxes. That's my problem.
Yeah, so I did this presentation last week at the senior center, and that was literally the first thing that came up there as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's okay. This is a great question. And like so many things that I talked about as far as revenue that the local governments can get in Wisconsin, it's regulated by the state. So property taxes in the state constitution must be uniformly applied. Nobody can be taxed in a different way.
Illinois and Michigan do things differently.
They do. All states do things differently. And in Wisconsin, property tax is uniformly applied. And so we can't treat people differently in terms of taxation.
State capital of all that.
There you go.
I've been doing that for years and it hasn't worked yet.
I think the state of Missouri just did a program where they're going to give credits for older
If you're
people.
a senior citizen, you shouldn't have to pay school taxes, for example. And I do like the idea of having everything work right, but I just am having a hard time getting by.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, and we hear that a lot, and I know our elected officials hear that a lot. And I think the referendum is a great opportunity for residents to make that decision, right? To balance those things where your personal situations versus
Right.
the benefits and maybe the negatives of this.
The other thing is sometimes things don't quite work right. Like the police department, they play favorites, and if they even if they have it on video camera, I found out from first-hand experience, if they kind of like the person committing the crime, they'll just let it go.
Your police chief is right back there, so
I'll talk to her.
you can talk to her.
I know it's a little dated, but I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Maybe we should work on changing the nature of our state legislature and see if we can get a different balance. Change funding formula that goes back to 2006.
Yeah.
Especially when our state is sitting on billions of dollars.
Right. Yes, I don't disagree with anything you've said. Yeah, I can only control, the village can only control what it controls. This is the situation that we have. These are the options. We can go to referendum for this. But yeah, all valid points.
Good. One more quick one. Is there any of this, I noticed that 30%, I mean, that seems fairly substantial. Or is any of the debt that you're carrying retire or anything?
Yeah, we have a pretty robust debt management plan. We have obligations that roll off every year, but we have stuff that comes on, of course. We're doing projects and things like that. I mentioned the statutory cap that local governments have for debt. Village is sitting at like 45, 46% right now, which is actually pretty good especially for a growing community. It's pretty common to see about 40s, 50s, even 60% when you get into kind of smaller communities because they're just smaller. And the cap is actually based on your assessed value. So yeah, it's pretty common to see most communities, cities and villages sitting somewhere in that 40 to 60% range. So we're doing pretty good. I mean, in my experience, Oregon's has been pretty low. We are in the lower end, I would say, especially for a growing community. Yeah. If this is going to be a recurring thing. Yeah. There was a time, I mean, I'm in my mid-30s, and I've been doing local government. I've worked in 5 different communities. Even in my career, 15-year career now, where people in my jobs, like administrator jobs, we would used to say like, oh, we're only gonna have to do referendum like once in our career. Like we're only gonna have to go through this like once. It's gonna be the situation that we're in and the dynamic that we're in, as long as all things stay equal as far as how revenue works in the state for local governments. I think we're just gonna be in this cycle. Every 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, I think we're gonna have these problems that are gonna come up again. School districts have been in this cycle for a lot longer. They have a really restrictive revenue environment as well. And they'll periodically come for these operational referendums because they have these sort of similar challenges. And local governments had the benefit of having some different sources to kind of pull on and do some things over the last 20 years, but it's now finally sort of caught up, and inflation was the thing that really broke the back for all of these communities. And I think, yeah, you're going to see it, this issue just keep recurring over and over again unless something changes at the state funding level. But to my point that I made before, we went to a community survey in the fall and asked folks, what would you be willing to sort of accept here if we went to referendum? And there was a good support for sort of in the $2 million range, especially for maintaining existing services. So that was the feedback that we heard was stick to this traditional stuff. We don't want to add things on here. So I think I would anticipate, if this happens in the future, that's the sort of process that hopefully future village boards will take as well. Is how is the community feeling about this? Where is the community sort of at with all this? What do people support? What people don't support? And then try to evaluate what's the best option for trying to sustain those services. Yeah. Well, and then, there's challenges with that in terms of your entire operating expenses, your primary source of revenue, the property tax. The only way you can increase it is through growth. So if you don't grow, you don't get any money. So you're just standing still basically from a revenue standpoint. And when you have things like inflation, you're not standing still at all. Your expenses are just going up, even if you're doing the same things and even if your population is exactly the same. And that's why we've seen not growing communities have to go for high increases in referendums because costs are just getting away from them. And growth provides some benefits because it's beneficial in terms of growth is tied entirely to that increase in property taxes for operating expenses. But it does have challenges, right? I mean, it creates more demand, it creates more infrastructure to maintain, and that sort of thing. So there's these trade-offs that you have to have, and have to, as a community, you have to think about and decide about. But yeah, I can tell you, I mean, in City of Monona, Village of Maple Bluff, they're not growing communities. They'll say the same thing. It's, you can't stand still because your costs still get away from you.
They have to be happy about your growth. When you're building houses everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, and like I showed on that graph, it worked for the village for 15.
Well, the inflation line.
Right. Yep.
So what about the business growth? You know, I look at Verona on that graph, and they have.
Yep. Right. They're the outlier. Yeah.
I mean, where's our?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're, yeah.
Businesses around us.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question. So, like a lot of, and this is a little bit of my own assessment because I came here 4 years ago, so this is a little bit of editorializing on my part. Like a lot of suburban communities around, you know, major cities, Oregon really wanted to be a bedroom community for most of the 20th century and into the early 21st century. There was a heavy emphasis on, we just want to live here. We just want residences. We just want houses, and we'll shop and we'll be employed in other places. And that's pretty common, right? I mean, you can look at the village's assessed value. You can look at Wanakee, McFarland. Residential assessed value makes up over 80% of these communities. And for still a lot of them that are starting to grow some commercially and manufacturing, they're still sitting at 70%. I think some Prairie, I mean, they've had tremendous commercial growth. They still have over 60% of their value is residential. So that was just sort of the dynamic that transpired for many, many decades. And then you started to see a shift, especially in the early 21st century, including here, where people started to think, okay, we just don't want houses, we want businesses, and we want places to work and places to shop. And so, you know, communities have had success to varying degrees, and sometimes you get a unicorn like Epic, and that's great. But that's usually, you know, the outlier and not the par for the course. But the village has done quite a bit. I was looking at this today. Manufacturing assessed value has actually increased 102% in the last 10 years. I believe it's 60% for commercial value too. So you could go back about 15 years ago and stuff you see on the southeast side of town, the hotel, headquarters, Bodie Howe, Culver's, Quick Trip, that stuff wasn't there. So the village has done a little work there. The business park on the northwest side of town, 2010, that was just starting to get off the ground. So Tracty, Ticey, who's done a couple expansions, Tracty's done a couple expansions, Lycon. Again, 10 years ago, that was just barely starting to get off the ground. Now it's starting to fill up. And so you've seen some of that growth there. And so the village has done some work. They've kind of changed the mentality a little bit. People have thought a little bit differently. And of course, that's driven by residents, and residents get on the board and make those decisions. And I think that mentality is definitely still there. I mean, I know this current village board, that's a huge focus, is how can we drive more commercial and manufacturing development in the community. And Oregon has some challenges because, number one, to the north, we can't go north. We're cut off by the city of Fitchburg. So that's their jurisdiction. Villages can't grow into other incorporated municipalities like cities and villages. So we can't go north. East, across Highway 14, it's wet. You know, like a lot of Oregon, there's a lot of wetlands, there's a lot of floodplain. It's not terribly suitable for development, and in order to get over there and do work, it's really costly.
Notice that the old houses in the towns have the best land to be planted.
That's right, yep. So they took the best land, right? So, and then west and south, we start to run into issues with access and visibility. There's a lot of businesses, they want highway access, they want to be on Highway 14 and interstates and that sort of thing. When you get over here, you just lose that access, you lose that visibility. So that creates a little bit of a challenge. But I think there's opportunities for expanding the business park to the west. And I think along some of these corridors, like CC out here, I think, you know, we've done a little bit of commercial stuff out here with Omni and Beehive and the daycare there. I think you can kind of see some of that probably extending down CC as we continue to grow. So there are some opportunities there. And there may be opportunities maybe to partner with the city of Fitchburg. Maybe we can do some development together north of town. So there's opportunities, but there's also challenges, and a lot of that takes time, political willpower, sustained year over year over year over year.
They used to use the train, and also they used to have Charlie's commuter service and Greenham come through Oregon.
Well, and the train is a great asset too. I mean, if we wanted to expand our business park and.
The person could go traveling through Oregon and a passenger turn, and they understand a person had to be warned when they come around here, they want to get off at Oregon, Center or Oregon, Illinois.
Somebody back here.
Yes.
In that survey in the fall, 1,100 people responded to that.
Correct. Yep.
You had the numeric figures on, you know, it was a plus or minus 3 standard error.
Plus or minus.
What were the numbers of people that were for increases versus those against?
Yep, so the lowest cost option that was presented in the survey was a $2.3 million referendum, and that was just at 50% support from those individuals that responded. So in the survey, we had the lowest cost option, 2.3 million. We had 50% indicated that they would either definitely or probably support that. There's another 10% that were undecided, and then the remaining 30% were either definitely no or probably no. And that was plus or minus 3% margin of error. So the board looked at that, and you know, of course, we don't want to go through all this effort and spend all this time to put a question on the ballot that, you know, is not reasonably supported in the community, or at least within a margin of error. So the board kind of looked at that. Okay, support. Took a look back at the costs and things that we've been evaluating, and decided to reduce and go for a $1.95 million referendum. So lopped off about $400,000 in hopes that, you know, people can see that trying to thread the needle of, look, we understand maybe half the population is supportive here, but there's another half that maybe aren't. And we want to recognize both sides and try to maybe reduce and go for a little bit smaller amount.
Now, your real quick question. What do case managers do? What kind of cases do they in the senior center?
Rachel, do you want to take that?
Well, I'm the senior center director. Case managers deal with people who are generally 55 and older, and they may have issues with housing, they may have issues with medical bills, they may have issues with transportation, they don't drive anymore, they still need to be able to get to appointments and things. They tend to be people who need support to be able to stay in their homes rather than having to leave their homes and go into a different kind of a setting. So it's an opportunity for people to remain in the community with help arranging, bringing to them the kinds of things that they need to be able to stay here. Does that answer?
What kind of qualified people are there to answer the questions?
So master degreed social work.
Are they volunteers?
Oh no, they are social workers with master's degrees. We have a lot of volunteers at the senior center. We have 180 of them. We get 14 hours from volunteers every day just getting our meals prepared and out and delivered to people. So we have one 5-hour-a-day staff person, and then we have 3 volunteers that give us about 14 hours a day. They rotate, it's not the same 3 every day, thank goodness. And then we have volunteers that deliver those meals, that come in and drive those meals around. We only have 3 full-time staff at the senior center, but we have enough volunteers to make up more than 4 additional full-time staff. And then we have some part-time staff, like our kitchen gal is part-time, our case managers are part-time. So we're doing as much as we can with volunteers, but volunteers can't provide the kind of confidential, highly trained services that case managers provide for people.
So I think my question's been answered just by the presentation, but I just want to be sure because of the wording is confusing to me.
Yeah.
So that this is the levy is for the foreseeable future on every year's tax.
Yes. Yep. So let's stick with that one. Yeah. So if the referendum passes in April, then we will add $1.95 million into the village's levy, and it will hit on your tax bill in December of this year. And then that's it. You know, next year we're not going to add more on top of it. That'll be that amount again. Yep, that 1.95 will stay in the levy moving forward. Yep.
What's the difference in property tax between a multifamily dwelling and single family?
Yeah, no difference. They're taxed the same.
So if the multifamily's worth $6 million,
Oh yeah.
it's 2 point whatever.
Yeah, and I think actually the Prairie Brook apartments, the new ones that are on Janesville Street, are now the highest taxed property owner in the village. Getting some nodding heads from my clerk back there. So yeah, they are taxed the same rate. Everybody's taxed at the same rate. It's the uniformity clause of the Wisconsin Constitution. And so yeah, if your value is more, you're paying more.
So just on the headcount position, so the HR manager, is that a position that you had before?
No.
Or you're adding it?
We're adding it, yep.
And you were covering that?
It's a little bit by committee right now. So we do have an HR coordinator / deputy clerk. So she does a lot of like benefits administration right now. I do a lot of more of the HR policy stuff. And then our department heads are, you know, they kind of carry out various HR functions within their departments as well. So yeah, we have 62 full-time employees right now. We have 48 part-time, and those vary from some just work a few hours a year. Some are like crossing guards; they just work in the school year. And then some work, you know, consistent, you know, maybe 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week. So yeah, we're over 100 individuals that we have to oversee and take care of, and so it's becoming increasingly complex. And when you have a group of people that it's sort of their responsibility, but not their entire responsibility, it becomes a challenge. And of course, employment practices liability is a huge thing. Exactly. Yes.
So it also, I think, I read 3 police officers.
Yep.
There's one opening right now.
There's a couple open.
Is that 4?
No, there's a couple openings right now of existing positions. So this would be another 3 on top of those openings right now. Yep.
What's the likelihood?
Oh, sorry.
Knowing how hard it is.
Very likely. They start the academy.
Yeah. And, you know, recruiting for police officers has been just an immensely difficult challenge for everybody. The profession has changed so dramatically in the last few years, and local governments have been struggling. And, you know, credit to Chief Pagenkoff, she doesn't want to compromise quality, and she's willing to leave positions open to get quality people. So I'm going to go back there so that she can answer a question. Yeah. Yes. Yes, so we have a couple seasonal positions right now in our Public Works Department, and we've been able to pull on the high school to find some people there. It's worked out pretty well. We've had some people that have gone from seasonal all the way up to Assistant Director of Public Works. So, yeah, we definitely pull on that, and we get some really good kids for our seasonal program. But then we also have we do work with different school groups, especially for like specific projects, especially in our parks, plantings, planting trees, maintaining different plantings, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's connections there, and we try to pull on them for things that make sense and where we can find some opportunities. I don't know. That's a good question. Mhm. I don't know exactly. Our library director isn't here right now. I'm getting some shaking of heads.
We used it for my condo board recently.
Yeah.
And I don't believe we were charged, but perhaps that's, you know.
Yeah.
It's not during
The other thing I'll say about are we figuring it out? Yeah. So the other thing I'll just say about the library really quick is the village board actually does not have power to administer the library. The library board does. There's kind of a unique little state law that kind of creates a little arrangement there. So I'm not sure what the exact answer to your question is. Yeah. Yes.
What about the fire department? So what's the anticipation for the fire department?
Yeah, so fire department, like I mentioned, they're a separate entity. They're a district, and we are a member of that district along with Town of Oregon, Town of Rutland, and the Town of Dunn. And so we all make proportionate contributions to that district based on a couple of different factors in the contract we have. We looked at their needs as part of sort of the whole evaluation of eventually possibly going to a referendum. Challenge there is we have to rely on those other partners as well. So raising funds for additional staffing, which of course they need as well, through a referendum may not work out because those other communities may not be able to contribute their shares. So we wanted to be careful about not asking for something that we couldn't for sure actually do. But the unique thing about fire districts and EMS districts in Wisconsin is they actually have a little bit of a carve out under the state law for property taxes, where if you meet certain standards, certain expenditure standards from year to year, you can actually increase the communities that are part of the district, can increase their levies by a certain dollar amount to get some more resources for specifically those fire and EMS services. We actually did use that this year, and we were able to, as the 4 communities, we qualified for that exception, and we used it, and we were able to hire a new full-time firefighter paramedic this year. So they have a little bit of some flexibility that we can kind of pull on, and so didn't feel like it was an appropriate thing to add into the referendum. Anything else? Go back there.
Will the wheel tax and streetlight tax go away now?
Yeah, so we asked that in the survey, how people would feel about getting rid of those and converting it to being covered by property taxes. So those 2 sources collect about close to $500,000 for the village annually. So now we would have to find a source if we were to get rid of those to backfill, what those revenues are now paying for. So we asked the question on the ballot or on the survey. 40% said they were supportive, and the rest were either not supportive or not sure. So the village board decided to not put that in the referendum because there just wasn't a good majority support for changing it. So it will remain, yeah. And I would suspect that a lot of people probably maybe did the calculation in their head of, okay, I'm paying this much for these things, and if it went to property tax, how much would I pay? And if you're over a certain value, you probably would end up paying more. And so I think people maybe did the math in their head, and I'd just rather pay those fees than pay more on my property tax. That's, yeah, just a guess.
The wheel tax that's paid by anyone who lives here, not just somebody who owns property.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That those sources, the wheel tax and the streetlight fee, they get collected from non-property owners. So yeah, they're a way to kind of grab some revenue from people that aren't, paying property taxes.
The shared money, the 20%.
Yep.
Where does that come from?
So that all comes from the state, and it can come from lots of different sources. They collect sales tax, of course, income tax, they collect gas tax, and then they funnel that money back down into local governments. And it's delivered in a lot of different ways, through a lot of different programs. There's often a lot of strings attached to some of those programs. Highway aids is a great example. You get money for maintaining our streets, but you actually have to spend more money to get more money, and if you spend less, you get less. So there's kind of like a push and pull kind of offset there. There's some other sources that are specifically tied to just certain services. We get some money for fire and EMS. The one I was showing up here is the largest unrestricted program. So it's called the County and Municipal Aid Program. And it's the largest amount of money that local governments get that's essentially unrestricted. And local governments can kind of use it how they want. And like I said, we were up over 400,000 20 years ago, and we're just kind of starting getting back to that amount here in the last year. And of course, over those 20 years, they were decreasing or kind of staying flat. So yeah, when your second source of revenue is either down or flat for 20 years, it's a challenge. Anyone else? Okay.
It seems that there should be more ways to resolve disputes, either with the police department, fire department, public works department. There ought to be some kind of an understanding peacemaker than going to the village board and these days.
You can always call me.
Huh?
You can call me.
You're in the village board?
I'm the village administrator. I can try.
Okay. I'll give it a try if there's a thing. Who are you?
Martin Shanks.
Shanks, Martin Shanks.
Yep.
I'm down in Dorset, so.
Yep. Give me a call.
Keep that in mind, because I've seen things that should have worked out better. I lived in this town my whole life in the same homes.
Sure. Anything else? We'll wrap it up. Everybody's free to go if you want. I'll stick around for a couple minutes if you want to ask some questions.
My brother and my nephew both both my parents both had.
Thank you, Martin.